It was a bright, sunny afternoon in Maple Grove. The kind of day where kids ride bikes, birds chirp, and everything feels calm. Tim Harper woke up thinking it'd be just another boring day. He was a regular guy, you know. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't cause trouble. He just lived his life quietly in his little house on Pine Street. Every week, he mowed his lawn so it looked nice and neat. Every month, he paid his bills on time. Nothing about Tim seemed special. He was the kind of guy you might pass on the street and not even notice. And that's exactly how he liked it. But not everyone saw Tim the way he saw himself. There was someone watching him, someone who thought she knew everything about everyone. Her name was Karen Baxter. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. Oh no, she was the president of the HOA, the Homeowners Association. That's a group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like what color your house can be or how tall your grass can grow. Karen loved her job. She carried a clipboard everywhere, scribbling notes about this house or that yard. She had sharp eyes, always looking for something to fix or someone to boss around. To her, Maple Grove was her kingdom and she was the queen. Today, Karen's eyes landed on Tim's driveway. Why? Because of one tiny thing, an orange cone. Yep, a plain old traffic cone, the kind you see on roads or at school. Tim had put it there for a simple reason. His buddy Mike was coming over later with his big truck. Mike's truck was huge and parking on the street could be tricky. So Tim thought, hey, I'll save him a spot. He grabbed the cone from his garage, set it in the driveway, and went back inside. No big deal, right? It was just a cone. It wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't even ugly. It was just there. But to Karen, oh boy, that cone was a problem, a big problem. She stood across the street, staring at it like it was a monster. Her lips got tight and her eyebrows scrunched up. She didn't see it as a helpful little cone. To her, it was a crime against the neighborhood. In her mind, Maple Grove had to be perfect. Every house, every yard, every driveway, it all had to follow her rules. And this cone, it broke the rules. Well, at least the rules she made up in her head. No, she didn't care that it was Tim's driveway. She didn't care that it was his house. To Karen, that cone was a slap in her face. Tim didn't know it yet, but his quiet day was about to get loud. He was inside his house, sipping some water and flipping through a car magazine. He had no idea Karen was out there fuming about his cone. He had no idea she was about to make a big fuss, but that's how it always was with Karen. She loved drama. She loved being in charge. If something wasn't her way, she'd stomp her feet and yell until it changed. And today, Tim's cone was the thing she wanted to change. Let's pause for a second. Imagine you're Tim. You're just chilling at home, minding your own business. Then someone comes along and gets mad about something as small as a cone. What would you do? Would you laugh? Would you argue? Would you just ignore it? I want you to think about that because this story, about to get wild. Stick around, I promise you won't believe what happens next. Now let's get back to Maple Grove. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and Tim's cone sat there all bright and orange. It wasn't bothering anyone except Karen. She marched closer to Tim's house, her clipboard tucked under her arm. Her flip-flops smacked the ground with every step. She looked like a soldier going to war, but her war wasn't with guns or swords. Her war was with that cone. She stopped right at the edge of Tim's driveway and glared at it. She didn't knock on Tim's door. No, she didn't call out to him. She just stood there, steaming mad. Inside, Tim was still clueless. He turned a page in his magazine looking at a shiny red truck. He smiled a little, thinking about how Mike would like the picture. Tim was a good friend like that. He didn't make a fuss about stuff. He just did nice things quietly. That's why he put the cone out there in the first place. It wasn't to annoy anyone. It wasn't to break rules. It was just to help Mike. But Karen didn't care about that. She didn't ask why the cone was there. She didn't wonder if Tim had a reason. To her, it was wrong, and that was that. Karen pulled out her phone. She held it up like it was a magic wand. She started tapping the screen, her fingers moving fast. What was she doing? Calling someone? Texting? Tim didn't know yet, but he'd find out soon. Karen's voice broke the quiet afternoon. "This is ridiculous," she said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "A cone in the driveway. Who does he think he is?" She shook her head, her ponytail bouncing. She was talking to herself, but she didn't care if anyone heard. She wanted them to hear. She wanted everyone to know she was upset. Across the street, a lady peeked out her window. Mr. Jenkins, who lived next door, stepped onto his porch. They heard Karen's voice and wondered what was going on. Was it something big? Was it something bad? Nope, it was just a cone. But to Karen, it might as well have been a giant mess. She kept talking, louder now. "This neighborhood has rule. We can't have people doing whatever they want." She waved her arms, pointing at the cone like it was proof of a crime. Tim finally heard her. He put down his magazine and walked to the window. He pulled back the curtain just a little and peeked outside. There was Karen standing by his driveway yelling about something. He squinted and saw the cone. "Oh," he said to himself, "that's what this is about." He almost laughed. It was so silly. A cone, really? He thought about going out there to talk to her, but he didn't, not yet. He just watched, wondering what she'd do next. Karen didn't stop. She kept going. "I'm not letting this slide," she said. She tapped her phone again, and this time she held it to her ear. Who was she calling? Tim couldn't hear her words, but he saw her lips moving fast. Her face was red now, like she'd been running. She paced back and forth, still glaring at the cone. The neighbors watched too. Some shook their heads, some whispered to each other. Everyone knew Karen was bossy, but this was next level crazy. Let's think about this again. What would you do if someone got this mad about a cone? Would you go out and say something? Would you stay quiet like Tim? I bet you're curious about what happens next, right? Good, because this is just the start. Karen's about to make a move, and Tim, well, he's got a surprise up his sleeve. You're not gonna want to miss it. Back to the story. The sun was still high, casting shadows on the ground. Tim's cone glowed in the light, looking harmless as ever. But Karen acted like it was the worst thing she'd ever seen. She finished her phone call and stuffed the phone in her pocket. She nodded to herself like she'd just won a big fight. "That'll show him," she muttered. She turned and stomped back toward her house, her flip-flops smacking louder than before. Whatever she'd done, she was proud of it. Tim let the curtain fall back. He shrugged and picked up his magazine again. "Weird," he said out loud. He didn't get why Karen cared so much. It was just a cone, just a spot for Mike's truck. He didn't think it was worth all this yelling. But Karen, she thought it was war, and she'd just fired the first shot. What did she do? Who did she call? Tim didn't know yet, but he'd find out soon enough. The neighborhood went quiet again. The lady across the street closed her window. Mr. Jenkins went back inside, but something was coming, something big. Karen had a plan, and Tim, he wasn't as simple as he looked. That cone wasn't just a cone, it was the start of something wild. So here's my question one more time. What would you do if someone freaked out over something this tiny? Stick around, friends, this story about to get crazy. Karen was mad. Really, really mad. She stormed over to Tim's house like a tornado tearing through a field. Her flip-flops hit the pavement hard, smack, 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 like tiny thunderclaps rolling across the quiet street. She stopped right at the edge of Tim's driveway and stared at that orange cone. To her, it wasn't just a cone, it was a disaster. "This cone is an eyesore," she yelled, her voice loud and sharp. She pointed at it with one finger like it was a pile of stinky trash or a broken toy someone left behind. She wanted everyone to know how much she hated it. Tim was inside his house, sitting on his couch with his car magazine. He heard Karen's voice and got curious. He stood up, walked to the window and peeked out. There she was, standing by his driveway, shouting about the cone. He tilted his head, confused. "It's just a cone, Karen," he said calmly. His voice was soft, like he didn't want to fight. He didn't see what the big deal was. It was just a little orange cone he put there to save a parking spot for his friend Mike. Why was she so upset? But Karen didn't care what Tim thought. She wasn't having it, not one bit. She crossed her arms and shook her head so hard her ponytail bounced. "No way," she snapped. "This is serious. I'm calling 911. This cone violates Rule 47B of the HOA code." Her words came out fast, like bullets from a toy gun. She sounded so sure of herself, like she'd caught Tim doing something awful. Tim scratched his head and frowned. Rule 47B, what was that? He'd lived in Maple Grove for years, and he'd never heard of Rule 47B. Was it even real? Or was Karen just making it up to sound important? Karen didn't wait for Tim to ask questions. She yanked her phone out of her pocket, her fingers moving quick. She huffed and puffed, her breath loud and angry like a dragon about to breathe fire. She tapped the screen, tap, 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 and held the phone to her ear. "Hello, yes, 911, I need help," she said, her voice getting louder. Tim watched from the window, his eyebrows going up. Was she really calling the police over a cone? He couldn't believe it. He shrugged his shoulders and turned away. "Okay, whatever," he mumbled to himself. He walked back to his couch and sat down. If Karen wanted to be silly, that was her problem. He wasn't going to worry about it. But here's the thing, Karen didn't know everything. She thought Tim was just a regular guy, a quiet guy who mowed his lawn and didn't cause trouble. She thought he was nobody special, but she was wrong. Tim had a secret, a big one. It wasn't something he told people about. It wasn't something you could see just by looking at him, but it was there, hiding inside him, waiting for the right moment. And that secret, it was about to turn Karen's whole day upside down. Can you guess what it might be? Don't say it yet, let's keep going and find out. Outside, Karen kept talking on the phone. "Yes, there's a cone in a driveway," she said to the person on the other end. "It's breaking the rules. You need to send someone now." She paced back and forth, her flip-flops smacking the ground. Smack, smack, smack. She waved her free hand in the air like she was trying to swat a fly. The cone just sat there, all bright and orange, not moving an inch. It didn't care that Karen was mad. It didn't know she was calling it a problem. It was just a cone, doing its job. The neighbors started to notice. Mrs. Carter, who lived across the street, peeked out her window. She pulled her curtain back just a little and watched Karen stomp around. Mr. Jenkins, Tim's next-door neighbor, stepped onto his porch with a cup of coffee. He leaned against the railing and stared. "What's she yelling about now?" he muttered. Everyone in Maple Grove knew Karen. She was always bossing people around. Last week, she told Mrs. Carter her flowers were too pink. The week before, she said Mr. Jenkins' dog barked too loud. And now it was Tim's cone. The neighbors rolled their eyes, but they kept watching. Karen was like a show they couldn't turn off. Tim sat back down on his couch and picked up his magazine. He flipped to a page with a blue car and tried to read, but Karen's voice kept sneaking through the window. "This is unacceptable," she shouted. "We have rules for a reason." Tim sighed. He didn't want to fight with her. He didn't want to yell back. That wasn't who he was. He was the guy who stayed calm even when things got weird. But deep down, he was starting to wonder, why did Karen care so much? Why was she making such a big deal out of nothing? He didn't know yet, but he'd find out soon. Karen finished her call and stuffed her phone back in her pocket. She put her hands on her hips and glared at Tim's house. "You'll see," she said, talking to herself. "You can't just put cones wherever you want." She nodded, like she'd won a big argument. She thought the police would come rushing over, lights flashing, to take the cone away. She thought Tim would get in trouble. She thought she was right about everything. But oh, how wrong she was. Let's stop for a second. Imagine you're Tim, sitting inside, hearing Karen yell about your cone. She's calling 911, acting like you broke a huge rule. What would you do? Would you go outside and tell her to stop? Would you laugh and let her be silly? Or would you just sit there like Tim, waiting to see what happened? Think about it, because this story's getting good. Karen thinks she's in charge, but Tim's secret is waiting to surprise her. Stick with me, you're gonna love this. Back outside, Karen kept packing. Her flip-flops were loud and her face was red. She looked like she might explode. "I run this neighborhood," she said, loud enough for anyone to hear. "People need to follow the rules." She pointed at the cone again like it was the worst thing she'd ever seen. To her, it wasn't just a cone. It was a sign that Tim didn't respect her. And Karen, she needed everyone to respect her. She needed to feel big and important. That's why she carried her clipboard. That's why she made up rules like Rule 47B. She wanted to be the boss. But Tim wasn't like that. He didn't need to feel big. He didn't need to boss people around. He was happy just being Tim, quiet, simple Tim. At least that's what Karen thought. She didn't know the real Tim. She didn't know what he was hiding. She saw him as a guy who put a cone in his driveway and broke her rules. She didn't see the strength inside him. She didn't see the secret waiting to come out. And that was her mistake. The air felt heavy now, not because of the weather, it was still sunny and warm, but because something was building. Karen's anger was growing, the neighbors' curiosity was growing, and Tim, he was still calm, but he was watching. He didn't know what Karen had started, but he'd find out soon. The cone sat there, quiet and still, like it was waiting too. It was just a cone, but it was about to start something big. Karen crossed her arms again and stared at Tim's house. "He'll learn," she muttered. "He'll see who's in charge." She thought she'd won. She thought calling 911 was the perfect move. She thought the police would back her up. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know Tim's secret. She didn't know that her big plan was about to fall apart. Tim flipped another page in his magazine. He heard Karen's muttering, but he didn't let it bother him. He was used to people like her, loud, pushy, always making a fuss. He didn't fight back. He didn't need to, not yet, but something was coming, something Karen didn't expect. Her flip-flops kept smacking, her voice kept rising, and the tension kept building. The neighborhood was quiet, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. So what do you think? Can you feel it getting exciting? Karen's out there all mad and loud, thinking she's the queen. Tim's inside, all calm and quiet, hiding something big. What's his secret? How's it gonna change everything? Don't guess yet, just keep reading. This story, about to twist in a way you won't believe. The next hour felt slow, like time was stretching out just to tease everyone. Karen stood by Tim's driveway, her arms crossed tight across her chest. She didn't move much, just shifted her feet a little. Her flip-flops stayed quiet for once, but her mouth didn't. She muttered to herself, her voice low and grumpy. "Standards," she said over and over. "This neighborhood has standards." She shook her head like she couldn't believe what was happening. "Riffraff," she mumbled next. "Riffraff moving into my perfect neighborhood." She said it like Tim and his cone were ruining everything she loved about Maple Grove. Karen was sure she was right. She thought Tim was some messy, rule-breaking guy who didn't belong. She thought her call to 911 would fix it all. She pictured police cars zooming in, lights flashing, officers jumping out to grab that orange cone and tell Tim off. In her head, she was the hero, saving the neighborhood from people like him, so she waited. She stood there, tapping her foot, staring at the street, waiting for her big win. Meanwhile, Tim was inside his house, totally chill. He sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee from a blue mug. The coffee was warm and it smelled good. He held the mug with both hands and took small sips like he didn't have a care in the world. He didn't argue with Karen. He didn't yell back when she shouted. He didn't even peek out the window much anymore. He just watched, calm and quiet, like a cat sitting on a windowsill. Tim wasn't worried. Why should he be? It was just a cone. Now, just a little thing to help his friend Mike. Karen could huff and puff all she wanted. Tim wasn't going to let it ruin his day. But then something happened, something small but big enough to make you sit up and pay attention. A police car rolled down the street. Its tires hummed on the pavement and its black and white paint gleamed in the sun. Karen's eyes lit up. "Finally," she said, uncrossing her arms. She straightened her back and smiled a little like she'd just won a prize. She thought the cops were here for Tim. She thought they'd pull up to his house, jump out, and say, "Take that cone away, mister." She was ready to point and say, "See, I told you." But the police car didn't stop at Tim's house. It kept going, slow and steady, right past his driveway. Karen blinked, confused. "Wait, what's this?" she mumbled. Her smile faded fast. The car rolled a little farther and then stopped right in front of her house. The engine turned off and the street went quiet again. Karen's mouth dropped open a tiny bit. She didn't get it. Why were they at her place? This wasn't part of her plan. Inside, Tim took another sip of coffee. He heard the car outside and stood up. He walked to the window, pulled the curtain back just a little and peeked out. He saw the police car parked at Karen's house. He saw her standing there looking lost. A tiny grin crept onto his face, not a big one, just a little one. He didn't say anything. He didn't laugh out loud. He just watched, still calm, still quiet. But that grin, it meant something. It was the first hint that Tim wasn't as ordinary as Karen thought. The two officers stepped out of the car. They were tall and serious, with shiny badges on their uniforms. Their boots hit the ground with a soft thud and they adjusted their hats. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. They looked like they meant business. Karen saw them and waved her hand big and fast. "Over here," she shouted, her voice loud again. "It's the cone guy, he's the problem." She pointed at Tim's driveway, at that orange cone sitting there all innocent. She was sure they'd turn around and march over to Tim's house. She was sure they'd listen to her. But the officers didn't even glance at Tim's driveway. They didn't look at the cone. They didn't look at Tim's house. Instead, they turned the other way and marched straight toward Karen's front door. Their steps were steady, thump, thump, thump like a drum beat. Karen's eyes got wide. "What?" she said, softer now. She took a step back, her flip-flops scuffing the pavement. She didn't understand. Why were they going to her house? She called them about Tim. She was the one who needed help. What was going on? Tim leaned against the window frame, still holding his coffee mug. His grin got a tiny bit bigger. He didn't say a word, but his eyes followed the officers. He watched them walk up Karen's porch steps. He watched them stop at her door. Something big was brewing. You could feel it in the air. The sun was still shining. The birds were still chirping, but the street felt different now. It wasn't just about the cone anymore. It was about something more. Karen spun around, her ponytail whipping through the air. "Hey," she called out, jogging toward the officers. "You've got the wrong house. It's him you want." She pointed at Tim's place again, her finger shaking a little. She was starting to get nervous. The officers didn't turn around. One of them knocked on her door, knock, 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 loud and firm. The other stood there, hands on his hips, waiting. Karen stopped running and just stood in her yard, staring. "This isn't right," she muttered. "This isn't what I wanted." The neighbors were watching now, too. Mrs. Carter peeked out her window again, her nose almost touching the glass. Mr. Jenkins stepped back onto his porch, his coffee cup still in his hand. A kid riding a bike slowed down and stared. Everyone could tell something was up. Karen's yelling had pulled them in, but now the police car kept them hooked. Why were the cops at her house? What did she do? Nobody knew yet, but they wanted to find out. Tim set his mug down on the table. He crossed his arms and kept watching. He didn't look mad. He didn't look scared. He looked ready, like he knew something Karen didn't, like he'd been waiting for this. The officers knocked again, knock, 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 but no one answered. Karen lived alone and she was standing right there in the yard, so of course the house was quiet. The officers turned around and looked at her. "Are you Karen Baxter?" one of them asked. His voice was deep and steady. Karen nodded, but she didn't look happy anymore. "Yes, that's me," she said, her voice wobbly. "But I'm the one who called you. It's about that cone." She pointed at Tim's driveway one more time, hoping they'd listen. The officer raised an eyebrow. "We're not here about a cone," he said. Karen froze. Her hand dropped to her side. "What?" she whispered. The other officer stepped closer. "We need to talk to you, ma'am," he said. His face was still serious, like he wasn't joking. Tim's grin stayed put. He leaned a little closer to the window. He didn't say it out loud, but you could almost hear him thinking, "Here it comes." Something was about to happen, something Karen didn't see coming. She thought she was in charge. She thought she could call the cops and win. But the cops weren't here for Tim, they were here for her, and that was just the start. Let's pause for a second. Imagine you're Karen standing there thinking you've got everything under control. Then the police show up at your house instead of the guy you're mad at. How would you feel? Scared, confused, mad? Or imagine you're Tim watching it all, knowing something big is coming. What do you think his secret is? Don't guess yet, just keep reading. This story's heating up and you're gonna love what's next. The air felt thick now, like a storm was rolling in, even though the sky was clear. Karen's hands shook a little as she stared at the officers. The neighbors whispered to each other. Tim stayed quiet, but his eyes sparkled with that little grin. The cone sat there, still and bright, like it was watching too. Something big was brewing. Can you feel it? It wasn't about the cone anymore. It was about Karen. And Tim, he was ready for whatever came next. The officers stood on Karen's porch, their boots planted firm on the wood. They knocked on her door, knock, 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 loud and clear. The sound bounced across the quiet street. No one answered. Of course no one did. Karen was standing right there in her yard, staring at them. She'd been outside this whole time, yelling about Tim's cone. The officers waited a second, then turned around. Their eyes landed on her. "Ma'am, are you Karen Baxter?" one of them asked. His voice was deep, like a teacher calling your name in class. Karen puffed out her chest, all